Welcome to the Pat Mayo Hour DFS preview for Fight Night Manila, but where it starts at 7 a.m., it's more like Fight Morning Manila, am I right?
Oh, yeah, I think you're exactly right on this one. You got to be a diehard fan to want to wake up at this hour of the morning to watch fights.
Like you. I can recall you waking up at like 3 a.m. to watch stuff.
That's right. You're trying to sleep, and I was watching fights from Japan for 3 in the morning.
But this is good, though. This is all coming back to roast right now because you know who these people are.
That's exactly it.
And that's going to be the theme of this show. You are the expert. I am the daily expert. I know nothing about MMA, and thus I have a hard time pronouncing people's names, especially on this card. I need a quick skim. It's not going to be good. Yeah. Right now, I'm batting 34% on mispronunciation, so I have 66% going right. I'm getting better as the weeks go along. I can see it going drastically the other way this time. However, I will say, every time I do say someone's name incorrectly, you will hear this sound. Always fun. People seem to like the sound effects.
Oh, sound effects had a huge key element, especially because you get to hear them so often because you mispronounce names so often.
This is true. So the one thing that I like to do is do a skim of all the pricing and compare those with the odds. We're going to take Kountermove. We're going to take DraftKings, compare their pricing, then compare it to the odds, and I'm going to find some values. And I have one right at the top to begin with. One is Makashvili, whose name I remember, versus Mark Adiwang. Damn it. All right. So anyway. Say it again?
Adiwang.
Adiwang is a favorite on DraftKings and an underdog when it comes to Kountermove. Yet, according to this, he is a plus 300 underdog in terms of betting odds. What am I missing?
I was shocked there, too. What you're missing here is that Adiwang was initially supposed to fight a fighter by the name of Alex White. Alex White pulled out of this fight, and then he's like, okay, who are we going to get? Makashvili. The thing with Makashvili is that we haven't really seen him in the UFC yet. Yes, you've heard of him before because he was supposed to fight a fighter by the name of Nick Lentz, although that fight ended up getting scrapped, never ended up happening. So Makashvili, the word on him basically is that if you need somebody super short notice, he's the guy to step up. Now, the fights that we have seen of him from the New Jersey regional scene, he's a good wrestler, he's a good grappler, he's strong, he's physical, but we haven't really seen a whole lot. He doesn't have a whole lot of fights. Adiwang, meanwhile, 1-1 in the UFC. His last time out, he got absolutely obliterated by Milson de Souza, but as we later got to see, Souza ended up being quite good. So Adiwang is a guy that really hasn't shown his true colors in the UFC yet versus Makashvili, who's yet to debut in the UFC yet. I thought that when White pulled out of this fight and Makashvili took a spot, I thought the odds would be closer to even. The fact that Makashvili is a blowout favorite in terms of the betting line, a little bit surprising to me. And then the fact that DraftKings, they're not really looking at it that way. Kountermove, they're leaving him at 4,800, which was his exact same value when he's fighting Alex White. So those one's very off to me. I am going to avoid this one.
So just completely, it doesn't matter either way. You don't have a strong, you think this is an even fight. So wouldn't that make Makashvili a value at 8,800 on DraftKings?
Well, Makashvili the favorite at 8,800, but I don't really know what I'm getting out of him. And the other thing, too, is 8,800 is cheap, and Makashvili is a grappler. So if he is going to beat Adiwang, I think he's going to take him down. He's going to hold him down. From the fights that I've seen of him online, he's not really a finisher by no means. And when he does finish guys, I mean, it's not like it's a one-punch knockout power. It's not like he's got sweet submissions. That he's able to grind guys down and allow them to give them openings. Adiwang is Filipino. He is going to be fighting in his own backyard. He will have his friends and family supporting him. I just don't think that even if he does lose the fight, I don't think it's going to be a whole lot of points scored for Makashvili. This card is super difficult to pick on just because there are going to be tons of finishers on this card because the level of opponents fighting each other are not that great. Guys will be finished. I'm not sure that this one's going to have a finish in it, and therefore I don't want it.
Okay, so an avoid for us on that fight, and that's the one that that's the one where the only one where the pricing seemed really out of whack.
Yes.
The other ones are either a bit closer, Kountermove is hedging their bets this week. There's a lot of $4,900 versus $4,700 guys, where when you see those same two on DraftKings, the pricing is a bit wider. So let's talk finishes. Who do you think is the safest, quickest finish on this card that we need to have?
Well, in the co-main event, Edgar, the Dreamcatcher Mousasi, this is a guy that the knock on him in terms of finishing is that people say he's very lackadaisical in his approach sometimes. Sometimes he waits back and he allows you to come at him, and that results in him not throwing as much offense, not going for that finish. However, if you try to pressure him, you are done because this guy is a surgeon. He's just so accurate and somebody with a long reach, good power, good submission skills. He can definitely get a finish. He's fighting Philippou, who fits that mold of somebody who's just going to throw himself into the fire. Philippou, a former boxer, been a good fighter, but very aggressive, and that'll be his downfall. I think Edgar Mousasi finishes him. On DraftKings, he's the most expensive player, but I am taking him on DraftKings. On Kountermove, he is still very expensive, not the most expensive.
But he's not, but on Kountermove, it's a bit more at 5,300.
Yes.
It's a bit better. That's not going to really break your bank. Because if you do take him on DraftKings, then you need to be giving me 2 upsets. And even going back to last week, the guy that you loved, Alp, or whatever his name was, he got wiped out. But the 2 underdogs came through.
Yeah, Robert Whittaker. He got the first round knockout.
And Hooker.
I know. Yeah.
TJ Hooker.
Oh, man. When my heads up came, I was like, oh, thank God. Because as soon as Alp lost, he's the first fight on the card.
It is. I actually submitted the lineup that we put in last week that we gave out on the show into 3 cash games, won them all. There was a 20-person. I ended up coming like 9th. It wasn't a huge blowout win.
Well, Alp was a small, but we mention it all the time. One person's going to blow your lineup for you, and that's it. And as you see, if Alp gets the win, and now you're scoring so many points, it causes people to say, oh, I don't want to play heads up anymore. I want to play a big cash game. It's like, no, keep the heads up. Win your matchups. We're going to try to avoid getting an Alp this time around. But with Gegard Mousasi, he's a guy that I feel confident in that. I know that he's expensive, but I feel like he's going to get the finish. It's either going to happen in the first round or the second round, but I'm confident that Gegard Mousasi is going to bring it on home.
Mark Munoz versus Luke Barnett. This is a tough one for me because I know who Munoz is. Heard the name.
Yes.
But he's not good anymore, is he?
Well, he's 37 years old. He's lost
That's probably not good.
Yeah, and there's a number of things that are happening in his life right now. He used to own a gym called the Rain Training Center. That was his bread and butter. He had this gym. A lot of good fighters actually used to train there. Recently, he just closed it, and he was very sketchy about it because in the interview about him closing the gym, he was like, oh, I just don't have time to deal with it anymore. I want to coach collegiate wrestling. He used to be a collegiate wrestler.
So he wants to be the guy from Foxcatcher.
Yeah, but it's like well, hopefully not, right? But it's weird that you would just, close your gym just because of a reason like that. So then he goes, oh, you know what? I'm going to sell it. And then later in the interview, they're like, so you're selling it, right? It's going to remain open. He's like, no, I'm not selling it. I'm closing it. So it's like, I don't know. I don't know if it was a financial thing. I'm not sure what's happening. But he wore too many caps. He was trying to be a gym owner. He was trying to be the head coach. He was trying to get himself ready for fights. It just didn't work out for him. And his last number of performances, he's looked extremely flat. And he's just not the same fighter. So the real big issue for this is that Mark Munoz has already announced that he's retiring after the fight. And fighters that announce their retirement prior to their actual last fight have a terrible track record in the UFC of not doing good. Luke Barnett is extremely big for the weight class. Working at Alliance down in San Diego, Alliance MMA. His takedown defense is getting better. If he can keep this fight standing, it's his fight to win. I actually picked him on Kountermove, $5,000. I thought that he's the kind of guy I can squeeze into my lineup. I am worried a little bit that Mark Munoz is able to take the fight to the ground because he's a good wrestler, but honestly, recently, he's not committing to his takedowns. They're not as clean as they used to be, and Luke Barnett is clearly working on his takedown defense. So avoid Munoz and some small action on Luke Barnett, and I do like him on Kountermove.
But you don't like him at 10,300 on DraftKings?
Well, at 10,300, you need to assume he's getting the finish. And to be honest, Mark Munoz has been finished in the past. He's been finished multiple times in the past, but literally against the best of the best. And Luke Barnett is not the best of the best. I see this one probably going 3 rounds.
Hyun-Gyu Lim against Neil Magny.
Well, you got Neil Magny. Hyun-Gyu Lim, actually quite close, to be honest with you. I mean, you threw your classic accent on there, but pretty close, to be honest with you.
So what are we looking at here? On DraftKings, the pricing is very, very close, within $200, although Lim is a sort of heavy favorite at $5,000 on Kountermove. And when you look at the odds, I mean, if you want to bet Lim, it's even odds. Yet in terms of betting, Magny is a favorite at -130. So I don't know what's going on in terms of the pricing versus the odds. Like, none of this makes sense. This is one of the ones where I need you to tell me what's what.
Well, this is a tough one to pick just because Neil Magny is a guy that they call him Mr. 2014 because he won 7 fights in a row. He fought 6 times in 2014
How's that
alone.
possible? Who's he fighting?
Because he's taking
Is he fighting people off the street?
Mediocre level competition. Not the highest level competition, not the lowest level competition, but mediocre competition. And he can beat all those guys every time he can beat these guys. And in the way he beats them, it's not spectacular. It's not like he's finishing them off super quickly, but it's efficient. He gets the win. If it goes to decision, it goes to decision. If he can finish you, he will finish you. And I like Neil Magny. There's a reason why he's winning all these fights in a row is that he's a smart fighter. Hyun-Gyu Lim is a guy that we've seen as a complete wrecking machine. I mean, he goes in there and he throws hands wildly and viciously. You would assume that this is the perfect player for a game like Kountermove or DraftKings because he's probably going to get a first-round finish or a second-round finish depending on his opponent. In his last fight against Takanori Sato, he knocked him out in slightly over a minute. And in his fight before that, he went all 5 rounds with a fighter by the name of Tarek Safadine. Didn't look all that bad. Almost knocked Safadine out in the 5th round. Unfortunately, if he was fighting some scrub, I'd say Hyun-Gyu Lim knocks him out, and I want Hyun-Gyu Lim. But he's fighting a guy that's very smart and very methodical and is able to grind away at you and pick his shots. And for $4,600 on Kountermove, I like Neil Magny. I think he's a guy that he could get the finish if the finish presents itself, but if it doesn't, he's got a 79-inch reach. He is, exactly. At 170 pounds with a 79-inch reach, it's the longest reach in welterweight history. Hyun-Gyu Lim also has a massive, massive reach. However, he throws them very loopy shots. Neil Magny's very straight. He's very
so he can get inside and get to you.
Exactly. And so we've seen kind of a similar situation to this weekend with Stipe versus Mark Hunt. Mark Hunt, he's winding up on these big, heavy punches. Stipe's a lot cleaner. He's a lot more effective with his jab and his counter right. I think Neil Magny plays that. So this one will probably go decision, but for 4,600, I don't mind it. I think Neil Magny wins. I think he might be able to score between that 40 and 70 point range, which is good enough for me.
How about main event, Edgar Faber? Minus 400 for Edgar.
This one's shocking to me. It is very shocking because on DraftKings and Kountermove, I felt the need to take both guys. And I don't do that very often. But with Frankie Edgar, he's the consensus favorite to win this fight. He's a volume puncher. He does have power. He's got good wrestling.
5 rounds?
It's 5 rounds.
So there you go. So the volume punching comes into play.
For sure.
Whether it goes to decision or not, he's going to pile up the points.
Yeah, and theoretically, I mean, Faber is a good wrestler, but theoretically, I mean, Frankie could take him down and that'll score some points. He could improve his position. He might fish for a submission, but it's the volume punching that'll score him some points. He is extremely expensive. So with DraftKings, it's 11,200. If you couldn't figure out a way to configure your DraftKings lineup, maybe he's the guy to drop out. But Uriah Faber, $8,300 on DraftKings, $4,000 on Kountermove. I have never seen a player so cheap on Kountermove as to $4,000. And Uriah Faber,
he's a 3-1 underdog.
But that's not crazy to me. That's not crazy. And also, he's an underdog in though, yes, he's going to lose. Probably going to lose.
But decision loss.
A decision loss. And he's the kind of guy that he's a great wrestler. And Frankie's a great wrestler. So this fight's probably going to remain on its feet. And if it remains on its feet and he gets hit 3 times and he hits Frankie back twice, he loses the fight. But I'm scoring points both ways. For Kountermove for 4,000, if I take a guy like that, now I can afford to take Frankie Edgar and Gegard Mousasi and Luke Barnett. And I can afford some more expensive guys for 4,000. I mean, that's rock bottom prices. Flip side, DraftKings, 8,300. Once again, for $8,300, I'd be happy with 30 points out of this guy. In a 5-round fight, he can score 10, 15 points per round. I mean, I see him scoring close to 50, 60 points by the end of 5 rounds. Frankie might get as much as 80, 90 points, but having them both on my team, I think it's worth it.
You don't think that if this gets into a standing match where they're throwing shots back and forth, that someone's not going to get knocked out?
Well, Frankie Edgar getting knocked out, I find that one very hard to believe.
Okay.
He has been wobbled in the past by the biggest shots you've ever seen, and he's taken it like a champ. His recovery rate is fantastic, second to none. So if Uriah Faber, who is not known as a power puncher, but he does have hard punches, he's not known as like a knockout puncher. If he hits Frankie, I'm very confident Frankie will be able to take it. Flip side to that, Uriah Faber is a granite jaw. He's been knocked out twice in his career, but once again, it was one was an early stoppage, a lot of people say, and one time he physically bounced off the cage, dove into the guy's right hand, and just clocked him. I mean, it was a fluke accident, really, if you think about it. But this is a guy that can take a great punch. And once again, Frankie's a volume puncher, not a power puncher. So he might hit Faber 3-4 times, but they're not wound up all my power into those 4 punches. So if he hits Faber 4 times, I'm glad to take the 2 points off my 4 significant strikes, but Faber's not going to go down. The fact that it's 5 rounds, I see it going 5 rounds. I see both guys having opportunity to score points. Yes, Frankie will win, but I think both guys will most definitely have their opportunity. And if I had to drop one of the two, I would drop Frankie because he's one of the most expensive guys.
You can find someone else to plug in at the top end.
Faber is so cheap, and he's such a legend of the sport. He's such a guy that is just like consistent and has been around the game for such a long time. His last couple of performances haven't looked great, but he's a guy that overall is great. I mean, for this value, I can't pass up on him.
All right, any more quick finishes that you see or potential sleepers on this card that we can use to pile up through our lineups?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really big on this Ning. He's faking a guy by the name of Royston Wee. Now, Royston Wee's from Singapore. He tried it for Tough China, did not make Tough China. Yeah, I'll show you right now. It is...
Who's he fighting?
He is fighting Royston Wee, and his name is Guang Yu Ning. Sometimes they write it Ning Guang Yu.
Oh, there he is. Ning Guang Yu.
So they reversed it on yours. Yeah, sometimes they reverse the name around there, just depending what.
So 9,300 on DraftKings and 4,700 on Kountermove. Is this because basically no one knows who he is?
Well, actually, it's very surprising you say that.
He's minus money to bet. Like, he's the underdog, but a very, very tiny underdog.
Yeah, Royston Wee, like I mentioned, he's from Singapore. In the UFC, there's a good market in Singapore, so they want a kind of a Singaporean star, right? So they bring in Royston Wee. He wins his first 2 fights in the UFC. His last fight, he fought a guy that was 1-1. And I thought he lost that fight. Most people thought he lost that fight. The judges ended up giving him a split decision, which means 2 thought he won, 1 thought he had lost. So he's not great by no means. But here's the real tidbit that you got to take out of this. I mean, first of all, Ning's just a much better fighter. They call him Smasher for a reason. He's very physical. He takes guys down. He smashes them. But Royston Wee tried out for Ultimate Fighter China. He went to the tryout, and they told him, listen, you're not going to make Ultimate Fighter China, but we like your skill set. We'll invite you back at a later date to fight in the UFC. Okay, cool. Ning won Ultimate Fighter China. He won the tournament, right? So this is his first fight at defending his crown, the Ultimate Fighter China. And when you see tough winners, they always kind of get a softball in their first fight.
Well, you want to make it seem like
exactly.
You need to give them the softie so they can win. Be like,
exactly.
Oh, if you win this show, you're going to win in the UFC. They're great.
Yeah. So for the UFC, it's like, okay, we got one fighter who's from Singapore who we'd like to build, but we got a fighter from China who we'd also like to build.
We much prefer to build him.
Exactly. And one guy's proven that, he's not so bad, and the other guy, I mean, he's awful. We don't even know why the judges gave him that last fight. But Royston Wee's a guy that, for some reason, people think he's good because he's 4-0 and he's in the UFC. He must be a stud, right? Why else would he be in the UFC? Not the case with this guy. He looked atrocious in his last fight. I think Ning gets the win here. And quite frankly, $4,700 in Kountermove, I love that. $9,300 on DraftKings, I like that too. I think there's a possibility he gets the finish, but at the very least, I think he'll rack up points.
And when you're dealing with one of these lower-end players in terms of pricing, that's all we want.
Yeah, exactly.
Just don't get knocked out, go the distance, and land enough strikes to
matter. Yeah, don't get fluke submitted. That'd be terrible news for me. But yeah, definitely Ning's a gamer. He's somebody that even if he is caught in a submission, he will attempt to smash his way out, not just take the easy way
out. John Tuck versus Tae Hyun Bang.
Tae Hyun Bang.
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 Bang. He gets in the bang of the bang.
Well, he's got a massive amount of power, so he is rightfully named.
He is an underdog in this fight, though.
Well, John Tuck's just going to have a better game plan. I mean, he trains out of the MMA lab, which is just a great gym, And John Tuck, they call him the Super Saiyan, although I haven't really quite seen him make that leap from Saiyan to Super Saiyan. But quite frankly, like I mentioned, he's just a guy that he's already fought in the UFC a number of times now. He's starting to get his feet wet. And training with John Crouch at the MMA lab, I think that'll make him, it'll do him a world of benefit. The flip side of that, Tae Hyun Bang fought over a year ago was his last fight. He fought in UFC in Vancouver at UFC 174. He knocked out his opponent, Cajun Johnson, broke his jaw, knocked him out. But then to take a year off is almost weird to me. It's like you're hot right now. You just won your UFC debut. You just got a good payday. You got a knockout. Time to get on to the next one. And he chooses not to. And this one's actually weird to me. Cajun Johnson is on this card. Cajun Johnson had his jaw broken in that fight. Took a full year off before returning. This guy didn't really take any damage. Took a full year off before returning. So I don't like that. I think John Tuck, the guy that's obviously been in the gym this entire time, I'm kind of leaning towards him, although I am avoiding them on DraftKings and Kountermove. Too expensive, and I'm not certain which way this is going to go in terms of finish. I mean, Tae Hyun Bang's got so much power, he could theoretically knock John Tuck out. That would ruin my lineup. John Tuck could take him down and grind him out. That would ruin my lineup. So just kind of avoiding that one.
You mentioned Cajun Johnson taking on Zhang Lepeng.
Yes.
Zhang Lepeng.
Zhang, I think it's Li Peng, but I feel like I want to give you a pass on that, but iffy at best.
Let's go to the judge. No, it didn't turn out well for me there. So is this also a stay away in terms of DFS?
I think so, just because Cajun Johnson, he's very explosive, he's very athletic.
Is
he's
he from Louisiana?
No. Although his name is Ragin' Cajun Johnson,
there
so you would assume so.
He'd be like Lash LaRue.
Yeah, he's actually from British Columbia originally. Now he lives and trains out of Montreal, Quebec at the famed TraStar Gym.
So he is Cajun Johnson then.
Cajun Johnson. Actually, he used to lose to French fighters all the time, and then probably eventually was just like, yeah, I need to go out there and see what they're doing right. I remember Stéphane Dubé lit him up. But back to this fight. He actually got his jaw broken in his last fight. Prior to that, he was on The Ultimate Fighter when we watched it, Australia versus Canada.
Okay.
And he also got his jaw broken. So he just had so many injuries.
Old weak jaw Johnson?
Well, he also took 3 years off. I remember one time he fought Ryan Healy, smoked him, and then he took 3 years off MMA competition. He had a detached retina so bad that the doctors are like, you're not likely ever going to fight again. He comes back from this detached retina, he gets his jaw broken. He fixes his jaw, he gets his jaw broken. It's really tough to see where he's at mentally, and the only thing that worries me a little bit is sometimes when guys have, consecutive broken jaws, when they have detached retinas, then they decide, I don't want to take risks anymore. And he'll hold him up against the cage. And he won't be the same Cajun Johnson that I would like him to be. And because I haven't seen him return from this gruesome injury, I haven't really seen Cajun Johnson version 2.0, I'm a little uneasy on it. Although I do love the guy, and he's a very entertaining fighter, and it'll be a fun fight. I don't know what I'm getting out of him, and for that reason, I'm kind of avoiding him here.
All right, let's play some rapid fire here through the last 5 fights. We're going to go with Jingliang versus Lima.
You know what? Diego Lima.
Did I get that one right?
No, not at all. But Diego Lima, the younger brother of Bellator champ Douglas Lima, he had some hype coming in, but he's been viciously knocked out his last 2 fights. Tim Means in his last fight.
He's a big favorite, though.
A little over a minute, he got KO'd. And his fight before that against Eddie Gordon, little over a minute, he got KO'd. And I'm not talking easy KOs. I'm talking he got knocked out. And so this comes back to my original point that I made about the last fight. I think Diego Lima will win the fight. Hell, he might score some good points.
But too risky.
But I think mentally he's worried about getting hit. And Diego Lima is the kind of guy that doesn't mind holding you against the fence. He doesn't mind that. And that scores no points whatsoever. So he's the kind of guy that in victory might score you 22 points, and that's not good enough for me.
So stay away. Nover Nam. Who do you like?
Felipe Nover. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about here. Yeah. Felipe Nover, this is a funny story about him. He's on The Ultimate Fighter, I believe, season 7. And Dana White famously proclaimed, this guy's the next Anderson Silva or George St. Pierre. As it turns out, he got cut 2 fights later. He was a bum.
Now he's back.
He's a male nurse from New York. and he's originally Filipino. So he went on Twitter and campaigned hard for this fight. He's like, come on, you got to send me to the Philippines. Come on, come on. And to his credit, he's actually got a 3-fight winning streak going for him. He has finished some fights. This guy's a dark horse. He's a sleeper. People remember him as a busted prospect, as a bum, as a can. They're throwing him on the wayside. Yui Chul Nam, this is a guy that's got some game, he's got some experience, but his takedown defense might be his underdoing here. Felipe Nover has good wrestling, and I did select him. And in fact, on DraftKings, $8,900, I was able to fit him in my roster, and I'm not feeling great about it, but I'm not feeling too bad. I think he's got some serious value here.
All right, so now we're going to get to the point where I just mispronounce everyone's name.
Oof.
Here we go. So we're going to go with
I got my names here.
Sang Cha N against John De Los Reyes.
Yeah, John De Los Reyes versus Roldan Sangchaan. This one's very, very iffy. I mean, you've got Roldan, who's from the Philippines, so on one hand, he's the hometown guy, and you've got John De Los Reyes. He's fought in much better competition. In his last fight, he fought Kyuji Horiguchi, who ended up challenging for a title at UFC 186 on a pay-per-view. So it's like,
That was a bad pay-per-view, though.
It was a terrible pay-per-view, and this is a guy that shouldn't have been in the main event anyways. But now you look at John De Los Reyes, it's like, okay, your last fight was against a title challenger? Well, how'd you do? Oh, I got knocked out cold in 146. That's not exactly good. He's lost both of his UFC fights in pretty quick fashion. And on the flip side, you've got Roldan, who's 1-0 in the UFC, but, wasn't all that impressive. I mean, mediocre at best. This one screams pass. The flip side to that is somebody out there is going to play 5 lineups. They're going to play 6 lineups.
And they're going to hit it right.
They're going to hit one of these guys is probably going to get a finish, and they're going to score big. It's just I'm not confident enough to do that, and I don't really want to play 5 or 6 lineups and include him in the offhand chance something happens.
Last fight, Nolan Tickman against Yao. Not Ming. It's Zakuki.
Yaoji Kui.
Yaoji Kui? All right, I'm going to give myself an X for that one.
Yeah, same here, actually.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
It was. It's set up for you to fail.
It really was.
But you did get Nolan Tickman. He's the favorite for a reason.
Easy. Yeah. It's basically phonetically spelled.
Yeah. Nolan Tickman is extremely expensive on both Kountermove and DraftKings.
He's a minus 230 favorite. That's not huge compared to some of the other guys.
He's 4-2. He lost his UFC debut by decision against Frankie Sayen. So, I mean, there's not a whole lot to know out of him. I mean, he trains at a King's MMA, which is a very reputable gym. Yaoji Kui, flip side him, the guy's 1-2, Pat. He's fighting in the UFC. He has 1 win professionally and 2 losses. Weird. But Yaoji Kui's the guy that Royston Wee, who we talked about before, Yaoji Kui's the guy that Royston Wee robbed. And Yaoji Kui's durable at the very least. He's 1-2, but he didn't get finished in his 2 losses. He was on Tough China. He went 1-1 on Tough China, but he didn't get finished in his loss on Tough China. So at the very least, he seems to be a little bit durable. Nolan Tickman's not a known finisher by no means. He has some finishes on the regional scene, but it's not like this guy goes out and finishes people. So for that price, you need to get a finish. I don't want to pay $5,500 on Kountermove to get a 3rd round decision against Yaoji Kui. I don't want that. I need a finish. And so I initially wanted Nolan Tickman. I initially fit him on both my lineups. But then I didn't have enough money on my back end. And I realized, why am I paying all this money for Nolan Tickman on the offhand chance he beats a guy that's never been finished as a professional? I don't really like it all that much. So I did like Nolan Tickman. I think there is some value in Nolan Tickman, but I opted to drop him. I gave him an honorable mention on Kountermove at $5,500 because it's easier to fit him into your lineup than, say, DraftKings. But I am avoiding him on both of my personal lineups.
But when you said you could drop Frankie Edgar, he's someone you could replace him with.
Absolutely. If you felt the need to drop Frankie Edgar and replace him with Nolan Tickman, you can even save $300 in the process. But that would be a not bad move. If you want to play multiple lines as well, that's a great move.
Let's get to your teams.
Okay.
So who are you going with? Who are your 5 packs for DraftKings? Let's hear it.
Okay, DraftKings, as we mentioned, Gegard Mousasi. This is a guy I believe will get the finish. I'm confident in him getting the finish and somebody that can definitely score some points. So I like Gegard Mousasi. Frankie Edgar, 11,200. Like I mentioned, he's the kind of guy that if he doesn't get the finish, that's fine. 5 rounds of him just continuously working. You have never seen somebody work as hard as Frankie Edgar in a fight. So I'm going with the safe points in this one. Then I got Guangyu Ning. Now, with Ning, it's like I mentioned, he's the smasher. He's got a good ground game. He can take you down. Oh, Kamala bowing to the feet.
Kamala taking it.
I think exactly. Kamala's telling you that Ning, that's what he's going to do. Take down. But I don't mind it. I don't mind it even if I think he's going to get the finish, but even if he doesn't get the finish, him being on top, just continuously throwing punches down is going to score me some points. Then we got Felipe Nover, $8,900. I needed a couple cheaper players on this end. As you mentioned, if you're going to take Gegard Mousasi, you're going to take Frankie Edgar. Now you need a couple underdogs, a couple guys that might have that upset. With Felipe Nover at $8,900, I think he's definitely a guy that could get that upset. I'm confident in him. I don't mind it. Then with Uriah Faber with 8,300, I don't necessarily think he'll get the upset. But it's like we mentioned. Exactly.
Pile
it's like
those
we
points
mentioned.
through attrition, and then it doesn't matter. You can score 65 points. That'd be huge for that sort of pricing.
Well, even like the one time we talked about Raquel Pennington. She'll lose, but she'll be on her feet. And that was the same logic in that Robert Whittaker fight last week. It was Brad Tavares should beat him, but the fight will remain standing. And if it remains standing, well, Tavares ended up getting knocked out. Whittaker had that opportunity. If you're on your back, you're not going to score any points. This fight will probably stay standing. Therefore, Faber at 8,300 will score some points. I'd like him. Flip side of Kountermove, because it's a very similar lineup. I want to go Frankie Edgar again. He's the most expensive at 5,800. Gegard Mousasi at 5,300. I see more value in that than on the DraftKings side, so definitely got to have him on Kountermove. Then we went with Luke Barnett, $5,000. You got Mark Munoz, who has been finished in the past, who's basically mentally checked out. He's got one foot out the door already. I'm sure he'd like to have a big career-defining moment to end his career off, but that only makes you want to fight again. So I think he's mentally a little checked out here. And Barnett, who's still a young kid, he really needs this win badly. So I think he's going to come in extremely prepared.
And we talked about Faber at 4,000, just giving you so much salary cap relief to take anyone that you want. He's on your back end. So who's your fifth guy?
My fifth guy was Neil Magny. Although I will admit he's $4,600. And then when you really look at it, and I do like this lineup, I will play a secondary lineup, and I will get Ning on there because I am confident in Ning. And with $4,700. This current lineup of Frankie Edgar, Gegard Mousasi, Luke Barnett, Neil Magny, Uriah Faber, it allows you to keep $300 remaining. So you could put Ning instead of Magny and still have $200 remaining. Or you could switch out Frankie for Nolan Tickman
and that's the thing.
And afford them all.
Even if you want to get rid of Faber and Edgar and build a new lineup, you could build probably a more balanced roster that way, but you like this one just as fine.
Exactly. I mean, one thing that you'll see from playing DraftKings and Kountermove is people do like to play several lineups. So the small altercations will be made in all of them. But what you need is your core players that should be in most of your lineups. Guys like Gegard Mousasi will be in those. And so I think there's a little bit of leeway both ways. But I do like these lineups for sure.
Cody Saftik. Follow him on Twitter at CJ Saftik, and remember to watch the Bookie Beatdown on the Fight Network and Fantasy Sports Network on Fridays and up on the YouTube feed as well. You can follow that at Bookie_Beatdown on Twitter. I'm Pat Mayo. Follow me at the PME, and I'll see you next time.